My name is Jason Alari. I'm the Executive Director of the Historical Society. It's great to have you here this afternoon. Today's talk is sponsored by Ron and Jennifer Miller. Are the Millers here that can be acknowledged? Raise your hand if you're here. Well, let's have a round of applause for Ron and Jennifer for sponsoring today's talk. Mark your calendar, next month, April 18th, Jack White on staff at the Society will speak about Sykesville stories, again, April 18th here at Grace Church. Wanted to make also an announcement about the Society's strategic plan. I'm thrilled that in March, the board approved a preliminary draft of our plan, and members are going to receive a draft of that plan in their mailbox with a letter from me. So keep your eye out for that letter and draft plan in the mail. You'll probably get it in the next week or two, I hope. It will also be posted in May on the Society's website, so you can see it digitally as well, and you can offer comments from the Society's website in May. In the meantime, though, if you'd like to send me directly your comments or your questions or concerns about the plan, you can email or call me at the Historical Society. We're thrilled to have Art Riley here today for today's box lunch talk. Art Riley is a lifelong resident of Westminster, Maryland. He was educated in Carroll County Public Schools. After high school, he graduated from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. He earned a Master of Science at the University of Maryland while completing a residency in hospital pharmacy at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Professionally, Art has practiced pharmacy for over 53 years in a variety of professional settings, including being Associate of Pharmacy Services at the University of Maryland Hospital and long-term care pharmacy. However, the majority of his professional career involved owning and managing Washington Heights Pharmacy with his partner. The practice included surgical supplies, medical equipment, and home infusion services. Within the community, Art has been involved in a variety of community activities, including leading the creation of the Partnership for a Healthier Carroll County, as well as Kiwanis. He has also been active in his church, where he has served as a lay speaker for over 35 years and has authored a book entitled At the Foot of the Cross. Art was elected to a 3-year term as a trustee of Kiwanis International in July 2014 at the International Convention in Tokyo, Chiba, Japan. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. After serving as a trustee, he was elected as vice president in 2018, which culminated in serving as president during 2020-2021. These experiences provided the opportunity to see the work of Kiwanians worldwide by traveling to over 20 countries and 30 U.S. states. Isn't that incredible? He witnessed efforts to raise the health, education, and social status of children. Art's real joy is his family, including his wife, Vicki, who's here today, a retired elementary school teacher and past president of the Westminster Kiwanis Club. They celebrated their 50th anniversary last July. His family pride focuses on their 3 successful adult children and 3 grandchildren. Let's have a warm round of applause for Art.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate the invitation to join you today. It gives me an opportunity to talk. I love to talk. So if I run over, my wife's in the back is going to give me a high sign. But as I go through my presentation this morning, I'd like you to concentrate not as much on what I'm talking about, what I have done, but I'd like you to concentrate on what you as an individual resident of Carroll County have benefited by your heritage and your citizenship in this wonderful county. It has provided me with a great foundation, and I want to talk to you mainly about how I think my roots here in Carroll County helped me in my journey in service. I would like to coax each of you to think about that as I go through. And I've entitled my talk, International Service with Roots in Carroll County. Now, my favorite topics, as I said, I love to talk. And I have 5 favorite topics, okay? My faith, I'm very active in my church. My family, I can talk about them for a long time. My community, both local and national, and I'll talk about in a minute. I can always talk about my profession. I've been very blessed by being a pharmacist in this state. But today I'm going to concentrate on service. Oops. I'd like to start with this quote by Winston Churchill. You make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give. And when I ask people to serve, whether it be to join Kiwanis or serve some organization, they say, I'm too busy with my work. And I feel a little disappointed. I feel sorry for them that they are not giving back to their community. You here, I'm sort of talking to the choir because you are involved in your community. You are involved in what's going on, and you're using your influence, your service hours to support this organization and other organizations within the community. As I thought about this talk, I decided, now, where do I start? Where do I start about my roots? Each one of us is a product of our ancestry and our roots. My mother was a Scot, for those of you who knew my parents. Do I go back to when the Scots arrived here around 1630 from Kent County, England? Or do I go back to my great-great-grandfather, Barnabas O'Reilly, who arrived here from Ireland in 1750? Or do I talk about I think it's my 7th great-grandmother, who was a French Huguenot, who got a land grant from Queen Anne, and she moved her family as a widow to an area in Pennsylvania which is now called Paradise? Or do I talk about my great-great-grandfather, whose discharge I have hanging on my wall, his discharge from the Union Army? But I'll skip ahead a little bit and talk about some people who are very important in my life. First of all, on your left are those of you who have been around and know our family, my parents. My parents always had a loving household. My father was a veteran of the South Pacific in World War II, and he came home. I was born shortly after the war, but he spent a lifetime in this community, developing a business, growing a business, giving back to his community. My mother was also very influential. She ran the household, and I knew when my mother used my middle name, I was in trouble. And then when I know she got out the fly swatter, I was in real trouble. The middle picture of my grandparents on my Riley side. My grandparents were both very different. I got to know at least 3 of my 4 of my grandparents. My grandfather and grandmother Riley grew up in a small farmette in southern Pennsylvania. Grew up through the Depression, and I didn't realize how difficult the Depression was on them until I got a little older and had appreciation for money. But my grandfather especially taught me a lot about the world. Even though he was not educated, he never missed the news from Paul Harvey in Chicago every morning on the radio. He got me involved thinking about local politics in general, and what the contribution a citizen should make to their community. The picture on the right is my grandfather Scott. Moved here in Westminster in the middle of the Depression, started a manufacturing business, and saw it through to a very successful organization. My maternal grandmother Scott died when I was only 3 years old, but she had a great deal to do with business, so indirectly she had an influence on my life as well. But as you grow up and you mature and live in a county like Carroll County, there are other people that involve you, that influence you. These are 2 pictures that the quality's not too good, but it's the best I could do. These were my first 2 bosses. The one on your upper left is Russ Morgan. Russ Morgan founded and grew WTTR, the local radio station. I worked for 10 years for him part-time, going through college. And he taught me a lot. The one on the right is Irv Goodman, who owned the Rexall drugstore from the mid-1950s, I think, until probably the early 80s. And they both had a very unique perspective on the community, which I think rubbed off on me. They taught me work ethic. They taught me how to report for work on time, do your job if you'll get paid for what you produce. They also taught me about customer service. And whether we like it or not, we're all in customer service. We're dealing with people all the time, and you can succeed better if you have a positive relationship to your people. They also taught me community involvement, and they taught me about business responsibility. And those really centered around giving back to the community. The community supports you in your business. They support you as you mature as a citizen, and your obligation is to give back to the community. So that gave rise to what I call my personal philosophy. I respect this community because of what it means and what it has given back to me. The strength is built on contributions from the community. Each one of us has interactions every day with other community members, and that helps form who you are. It helps you discover your personal talents. On mine, hopefully, we're in the business world, because I know I'm not a mechanic like my friend Pat Martin down here. It shows the obligation to give back to the community. And it also makes a realization that groups can provide a better, bigger service and a more effective service than any one individual. So what is the community? I've used that word several times. Well, the community is not only Carroll County, but it's also much larger than Carroll County. As the world grows smaller, our differences are magnified, but our closeness are also magnified. Individuals help define the community, whether it be local, statewide, or internationally. And I really have, again, a disappointment for those people who alibi their way out of involvement by being too busy. So how did I become involved in the community? For me, Kiwanis was the answer. And for those of you who are not familiar with Kiwanis, I'll give you a quick overview. Kiwanis was founded in 1915 in Detroit, Michigan by a tailor and a publisher. And it was originally, purpose was for business networking. But within 2 to 3 years, they realized that the needs of children in Detroit needed to be addressed by the business community. So they helped organize and expand Kiwanis throughout North America in the early years with the purpose of serving children. Kiwanis International is the only international service organization solely dedicated to improving the lives of children. They next founded a Key Club International in 1925 in Sacramento, California. Key Club is the high school equivalent of Kiwanis International, where we try to teach leadership through service. Our college level organization, CKI, was founded in 1936. Originally, service clubs were all only men, for the most part, except for the General Federation of Women's Clubs. Women's were admitted to Kiwanis in 1987. After that, we founded Builders Club and Kiwanis K-Kids, which are middle school and elementary school arms of Kiwanis. Currently, we have 6,800 chapters of Kiwanis around the world in 80 countries. Our motto is serving the children of the world, and their local clubs determine their local priorities. The objects of Kiwanis International are on the screen: to give the primacy to the human and spiritual rather than the material values of life, to encourage the daily living of the golden rule in all human relationships, to promote the adoption and application of higher social, business, and professional standards, to develop by precept and example a more intelligent, aggressive, and serviceable citizenship, to provide through Kiwanis clubs a practical means to form enduring friendships, to render altruistic service, and to build better communities, and to cooperate in creating and maintaining that sound public opinion and high idealism which make possible the increase of righteousness, justice, patriotism, and goodwill. Those objects of Kiwanis International were adopted in 1925. They're coming up with their 100th anniversary. But locally is where the rubber meets the road, as they say. Westminster Kiwanis is where I became involved. Westminster Kiwanis was chartered in 1932. We've celebrated our 90th anniversary. It has involved many community leaders from this community. In fact, if you go back and look through some of the newspaper clippings, you're going to see a lot of Kiwanians involved in major projects that affected this community, such as Carroll Hospital Center, the new fire department building, and other major community projects. Over the years, I did a quick calculation, and Kiwanis has contributed over $1 million to the community from funds raised. Currently, we sponsor 4 key clubs and 4 high schools around the county, which is our, and a lot of high school recognition programs, as well as scholarships to the Career and Technology Center and Winters Mill High School. So I mentioned the word key club several times. And key club, we say the kids need Kiwanis, but the kids need to be developed, and our purpose is to develop that leadership skills. The core value of key clubs include leadership development through service, character building, caring, and inclusiveness. I got my start in Key Club in Westminster High School. Westminster High School started their Key Club, I think, in 1952. I joined in 1980. I became the local president of Westminster Kiwanis Club in 1983-84. I served as a lieutenant governor of our division, which is the Central Western Maryland Division, in 03 to 05. I became Capital District Governor in 07 and 08. And as Justin said, I was elected as international trustee on the International Board in 2014 and international president in 2021. People ask me why I decided to run and put my name in the ring as for international president. First of all, it was a personal interest to me. The more I became involved, the more I was interested in what was going on around the world. I thought I could apply the knowledge I gained as a trustee. I had a great rapport with our membership, and I think my personal skills matched the Kiwanis needs at the time, and I was beginning to taper my professional career, so I had time to devote. During my year as president, I tried to communicate a vision of service. What I tried to communicate at the start of our talk this afternoon. I tried to advance the Kiwanis objectives. I tried to do increased leadership education at the international and national level. I promoted diversity within Kiwanis, and I advocated for expanded service to children around the world. Because as I traveled, I realized the needs might have been different, but children have needs around the world. The one thing that surprised me, however, was that I think I got more out of Kiwanis than I gave back to the organization. I developed tremendous international relationships. I had a broader understanding of what the world was like, and I had some unforgettable experiences and lasting impressions. And these lasting impressions are where I'd like to highlight for the next few minutes. I had the opportunity to visit many countries, and I'd like to highlight 4 or so here today. Our first trip was to Cambodia. Cambodia, Kiwanis had a working relationship with UNICEF. UNICEF came to Kiwanis and said, we have a growing problem in 40 nations around the world in regards to maternal neonatal tetanus. Maternal neonatal tetanus is a disease that affects children and infants they contracted at birth through unclean birthing practices. They die within 9 days of birth. It's a sensory disease, and it's so painful that mothers cannot hold their children. They cannot be exposed to light or sound. Kiwanis agreed to raise $110 million internationally, give that to UNICEF, where UNICEF would take the injections. 3 injections will protect a mother for the rest of her life, plus all unborn children, for $1.80. UNICEF had the network to administer these vaccines, and we went to Cambodia to witness this program in action. Young adult females of childbearing age were given 3 inoculations. The social aspect of this was quite interesting. We would go into some village, and the villages are still run by chieftains of the village. And if the chieftain decided no vaccines were given, no one were given. One village we were in particularly had this edict enforced until a friend of the chieftain died of tetanus. All of a sudden, inoculations were allowed. This is a picture of a young UNICEF volunteer or employee giving inoculations. UNICEF traveled to the furthest regions for these vaccines. They traveled by motorbike, donkey, horse, or walked to give these inoculations. The villages in Cambodia were very remote. We were about an hour away from the Laos border and the Vietnam border. Very dusty environment. All the homes were set on stilts on second floors so the dust would be less. Very little electricity. but they were all happy people. These are 4 young people that I had an opportunity to converse with for about an hour. All of them had cell phones, but they weren't connected to anything. But they were very interested in seeing my cell phone and seeing parts of the world they were not familiar with. They are 14 to 18 years of age. They suffer from severe malnutrition. I like this picture, and I tell this story fairly often. This was a mother and her children. She came up to me, and why she picked me, I'm not so sure, but through an interpreter, she asked me if I could help her. And I said I would try. And so she said, I'm always tired. And I guess because we were UNICEF, they knew we were healthcare workers for the most part. And so I talked to her a little while, and I found out she was a 34-year-old woman with 8 children. But we got her into the clinic, got her into some nutritional programs, and hopefully she had a more productive and a more energetic life. This was another family we were into. This mother with one of her children, of her 2 children on her lap, she was the main breadwinner of the family. She worked in the local water treatment plant where they developed some ice, where they froze ice and how to purify the water. She had 2 children. Her husband was a partial amputee and was a barber. But we had an opportunity to talk to them. And all of these people are exceedingly happy, even though they are in the, shall we say, very acute poverty. Our next trip, which made the other major impact on us, we went to Nepal. Nepal is a very interesting country, completely landlocked by mountains. It has no rail system. It has no superhighways. It has no pipeline. 30% of the country does not have electricity, and 25% can only be accessible by helicopter or horseback. But again, people were happy. Kathmandu is a city of 3.5 million people with 4 traffic lights and 3 crosswalks. It's a very interesting city. But we had the opportunity also to go to Lumbini. This is the town of Lumbini. Dirt roads. The oxen, the most valuable asset a family has, lives in the same house with the family. This is a school we visited in Lumbini. We have been in contact with that school several times. The children are from the ages of kindergarten to 7th grade. They get equipped with a shirt and a piece of erasable material, like a clipboard that's erasable, and 1 pen. That's their supplies for the year given to them by the government. We brought some polo shirts with us, and we bought pens and paper and pencils, and you thought they were gold. And they were so glad to see us. We also bought some polo shirts for the men. We started giving them out, and by the time the 3rd shirt was given out, the line had formed. The word had spread through the village. One man who came up with a bed sheet around him cried as we gave him a polo shirt. This is a picture of the class. It's about 70 students. They had a tremendous impact on Vicki and I. Another trip we went on was Barbados. Barbados is a very interesting country. It just gained its independence from the United Kingdom. Barbados has some wonderful Kiwanis members who we met with, and they traveled around for a week around the island of Barbados. This is a group of Kiwanians who assist a woman in the marketplace in Kingston, the capital of Barbados. She goes every morning with a pot of cooked pasta and serves 125 homeless people in conjunction with Kiwanis every morning. And they give out water and a piece of fruit and a cold sandwich to get them through the day. This woman works there till 10, then she goes runs her business from 9 p.m. until 3 p.m. I didn't see the business, but I assume based on her description it must be something like a market stall where she sells food. Then she goes home, sleeps for a few hours, and gets up the next morning to cook the pasta at 2 o'clock in the morning to take down. She does this 7 days a week. So people who say they don't have time don't understand what some people are capable of. This is one of the homeless men we interacted with in downtown Kingston. One of the fun days we had was we packed up packages of food, and the Barbados Kiwanians hired this bus, and we ran around the island giving out these packages of food one day. And the women of the Barbados Kiwanis Club packed more food for us to eat than they did that we gave out. In fact, we had 2 pastry chefs with us that day, and we ate a lot of cheesecake. The next country I would like to highlight is Panama. Panama is a very interesting country because of its diversity and its polarization, if I can use that word, economically. In Panama City, you have a great deal of wealth, as well as poverty, but when you get into the tribal areas, it gets very poor. This particular league is run by the Panama City Kiwanis Club. It's a little league team, and we interacted with them, and we got some wonderful pictures of the children playing baseball. Panama City is interesting because of course, the Canal Zone history. So there's a lot of U.S. history and a lot of U.S. knowledge in Panama. This is a picture of a nursery school that was run by a Kiwanis Club in Panama City, which is about 90% women. Its uniqueness is because it's run in an area of Panama City that is totally controlled by drug gangs. They had to negotiate with the gangs to set up this nursery school and get permission for the children to come. But they have that permission, and they also have the protection. So they're trying to give these children some education. In another situation, we ran into a Kiwanis Club that rented and maintained a dormitory for women. And I say women, young women. They're brought out of the tribal areas from 10 to 12 years of age, and they're given a high school education. The dormitory is run by some nuns of the Catholic Church, and they get a high school equivalency, a high school education, and some even are going to college. This is a special building which was renovated and from the Noriega time. This gymnasium was used by the Noriega regime to train their enforcement police, for lack of a better term. It was given to Kiwanis Clubs of Panama City when Noriega was thrown out of power, and it's now a multi-purpose sports arena where the kids come, play, learn how to play basketball and other gymnasium-oriented sports. So these visitations had a pronounced impact on not only my wife, but myself. But it brought several things, I think, that I'm trying to highlight today. First of all, citizens can impact the world community. Just because we live in Carroll County doesn't mean we can't have outreach. As I mentioned earlier, the world is getting smaller, and we have to notice those places where we can have an impact. The values and ethics and ideals are essential, and that's where Carroll County comes in. Those are the traits that I think taught me, that enabled me to extend my reach throughout the world. We must have education of future generations that include critical thinking. The world, again, I don't mean to harp on this, but it's getting smaller, and we have to understand the world. Citizens must have an insight that the governments must be honest and forthright. What we witnessed in Cambodia and all, not to be political, but as a tremendous influence growing from Red China. They are going in and buying politicians. They're buying the electorate by building schools, building other governmental buildings, and then they expect a reward for that. So society must demand a free and impartial press that will educate the public and the world community. We have to understand what's going on around the world. Hopefully that I was able to get some insight. I don't claim to be an expert, but I do know that things are changing. Before I conclude, and I want to leave time, they told me to please leave time for questions and answers, which I'll have plenty of time for that. But I couldn't have done all this without my wife. She has been a traveler. Every time, I think we started our travel history back in the 70s when I came home one day, say, let's go to the Soviet Union. And she looked at me as if I was crazy, but we've had a good time traveling. We've learned to travel, and we've been able to absorb a lot from around the world. And she really has a knack for interacting with children and promoting not only Kiwanis, but helping to guide children. So I'd like to leave you that action is necessary. We can talk a lot. I see Kiwanians here, and we talk a lot during our meetings, but action is what's needed. We need to find the ways in our communities and our communities around the world to help the children. The needs are extensive throughout the world. The needs may differ slightly from country to country, but action is what's needed. And it's citizens like us who have the ability, the means, to reach out and help these children where we can. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So I want to thank you for listening for these 30 minutes. I'd open it up to questions. If you have any questions about any observation or anything I've said today, I'd be more than happy to answer what questions I can. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to see some high school friends here, even some cousins that I don't see regularly. And I think I should probably bring up one more thing having to do with the base of Carroll County. Carroll County and Westminster, I've been privileged to be a citizen of, but we are the only community that I know of that has had 3 citizens who've led an international service organization. Myself, Larry Boone led the JCs, and Babs Condon led the General Federation of Women's Clubs. I don't think you can find another community in the world that can boast that stat. So neither one of those 2 are here today, but they I think can express a lot of the similar sentiments that I expressed today in their service to their organizations. Thank you. Plenty of time for questions if anybody has any questions about. Yes.
Thank you for the talk, and particularly showing those photos of children around the world. I'm curious, you obviously were traveling during COVID, and I would be interested to know what, if anything, what remedies or what protection were any of those countries offering their citizens?
Well, COVID restrictions impeded my travel more than it did. I should have traveled a lot more than I did. But COVID hit right while we were in Nepal. We got back into the States 24 hours before COVID really was, lockdown was in effect. So my travel was restricted a good bit during the first part of my year. COVID restrictions were similar that we saw here in the United States, masking, a lot of varying regulations having to do with masking. During that year, vaccinations were just coming on board, so we didn't have a lot of vaccination requirements, but travel was really restricted during much of that time. We did have an opportunity to go to a much more affluent area. During my final part of my year, we were able to go to Switzerland and France and Belgium. And we actually saw one program that highlighted the international cooperation between 2 Kiwanis clubs. There's a physician in Niçoise, France, who makes a specialty of finding children who have special needs and hooking them up with international physicians around the world that they don't have the expertise in France to address. And they found a young girl who I think was about 10 years of age, and she was wheelchair confined. And I don't know the exact diagnosis that she was, but they found a surgeon in St. Louis who donated his services to do the operations necessary on this child. And the family came over and stayed with Kiwanis family members during the 6 months that she had to be confined to the St. Louis area to deal with her surgeries. When we saw her in France, she was out of her wheelchair and dancing with her mother. Lynn.
We're all looking at the horrible impact of global warming every day on the news. What impacts are you seeing around the world, and what thoughts do you have on that?
In our travels in Europe, we saw a lot of wind-generated power. In the areas that I highlighted today, we saw very little effects of green energy. They have other more pressing problems. When they don't have clean water to drink, in that village in Lumbini, in Nepal, they have other priorities. They have, again, that's the best way to say it, they have other priorities. Again, Nepal has no natural resources, and when you travel the mountain roads, because they have no pipelines, it's a constant caravan of petroleum-carrying trucks that they buy all their petroleum from India. again, a Kathmandu, a city of 3.5 million, says they only have 72 hours of fuel oil and petroleum products for heat, power, and light at any given time. So it's a constant influx of petroleum products into the area.
Yeah, my thought was not so much what are they doing, but how they're being impacted by it, which I'm sure is tremendous from your experience.
Pardon me?
I'm sure the impact of global warming, not what they're doing with it, but how they're being impacted by it.
I didn't really discuss any of that with global warming. I think we have, again, I think it's, I'm not sure they have some of the technology we have to monitor that. In Nepal, their economy is driven about, I think it's 80–70% from tourism. And the climbing of Mount Everest is the primary component of that. It costs about $40,000 to climb Mount Everest, in addition to the $10,000 governmental fee to climb that. At Mount Everest, we were able to watch the sunrise over the Himalayas one day, and there does not seem to be a lot of global warming. In fact, still a lot of snow and ice on the Himalayas. So. Other questions?
First of all, thank you for your service as an international president and sharing this with us today. It reminds me of Barbara Bush's quote about 1,000 points of light. A small group can make a big impact on the world. But can you talk about what the local Kiwanis Club is doing for children in Carroll County?
Kiwanis clubs locally have the ability to decide what their projects are. Our main projects right now are, again, the sponsorship of key clubs in our 4 high schools, where we try to teach leadership through service in those arenas. Students identify, design, raise the money for, and complete the service projects on their own. Adults are there only to keep them within the boundaries so they don't do something illegal, immoral, and so on, or against school policies. That's our primary focus. We also raise a lot of money for scholarship, as I said, the Career and Technology Center, and we give out a big scholarship every year at Winters Mill High School. We have a lot of minor projects. We'll support the 4-H fair and other children service projects that address the needs of children. So we're always looking for new things to do, but those are our primary functions right now.
Where and when does your local Kiwanis Club meet?
We meet first and third Tuesday evenings for an hour or so at Bullock's down in Smallwood. So any of you who know people who would like to become involved, I can get you involved. And that's one of the reasons why service clubs as a whole have suffered a little bit over the last 10 or 15 years. And Kiwanis has been affected. Our effect is because Kiwanis was primarily built by independent business people. And with the reduction of number of independent business people, it gives, our pool has a tendency to diminish that we can draw from. But we're still active and always looking for good projects. The one thing we do not do is we don't address probably individual needs. If we have people who come to us with individual needs, we look at a global. We think there's a lot of good programs in Carroll County that can help individuals and vet those needs.
What are the high schools that Kiwanis is involved with in Carroll County? And do you have any plans to grow in those areas?
Pardon me?
What are the high schools that you are involved with in Carroll County? And do you have any plans to grow into the other high schools?
Whether we have a key club or not is dependent upon the school administration. We have the support of the central office. We have key clubs right now in Francis Scott Key, Winters Mill, Westminster, and Manchester Valley. The Mount Airy Kiwanis Club sponsors a key club at South Carroll. So currently, I think I leave Century and Liberty with no key clubs, and that's a decision of the school administration. We're always looking to ways to expand that program. One of the difficulties we run into key club is because there are so many kids that want to become involved, but they have so many offerings. It's hard to choose because a lot of the schools, the sports, key club, and other school activities meet at the same time. So I think right now we have about 70 to 100 at Westminster and about 70 at Winters Mill. and about 60 at Francis Scott Key, and the Manchester Valley is much smaller. That's
Are you able to impact the war areas, the children of Ukraine, Turkey, Syria, those terrible, terrible places?
Yes, we're doing that currently. My wife and I had the opportunity to be in Belgium and Luxembourg 2 weeks ago. We met with Bernard Altman, who's handling the coordination of those efforts, and they're channeled through our European clubs. Primarily the Belgium-Luxembourg district of our Kiwanis Club have the infrastructure to handle the money. I think that last count, I think there was something like 27 tractor trailer loads of food, baby supplies, formula and all have been shipped primarily to the border areas of Romania where the refugees are. They are not able to penetrate Ukraine, but they're able to distribute supplies in those areas where refugees are accumulating. And from what I'm being told is the refugees spend a very little bit of time near the border and quickly fan out throughout Europe. So most every community in Europe is being affected right now. There are also, Kiwanis' main focus right now in Europe also is a charitable work is Romania. I forget how many thousands of pairs of shoes that are shipped every year to Romania so the kids don't have to walk to school in the snow. Any others? Well, thank you for this opportunity. I hope I have brightened your day a little bit. The positive things is that where we've seen is that the children are happy. I'll leave you with one last story. When we were in Cambodia, we were talking with that group of young women, and one of them was a mother, and she had a child about 18 months old. And the child was in a pile of dirt playing with a plastic dump truck. And so finally the mother decided that the child had gotten dirty enough, whisked the child away in the back of the shack, and I guess hosed him down, came out with a clean pair of shorts on, and within 5 minutes he was back in the same dirt pile playing with the same plastic truck. So little boys are similar no matter where they are in the world. Thank you very much. Jason, one more question, looks like.
Well, I thank you for everything that Kiwanis has done. I had no idea what service and how far it expanded throughout the world. I think that's just amazing, and how you can touch so many lives with what you've done and the club itself. I thank you for that, and I'm so glad to hear that these countries haven't been forgotten. So thank you so much. Thank you.
And to give equal time, I know my friends, I have some friends here in the room, Rotary and Lions, and they do the same things. Lions, we have a little different focus. I said we're on children. I know the Lions Club, not to speak for them, but they have like a great vision program. They address blindness issues and vision issues, where Rotary is very involved in polio prevention and treatment around the world. So we all have our niche, and there's plenty of opportunities to help kids around the world and adults as well through service organizations that are housed here in the United States.
Art, I just want to say thank you for all the things you've done in Carroll County. I met you when you were part of the development team of a partnership for a healthier Carroll County. So I know how much of your heart you've given to this community to help us have good health and good outcomes. So I thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and I'm not sure I can hold a candle to what you've given to the community.
But you have done so much for all around the world, and it was a great thrill to see you and Vicki in the Rose Bowl parade on the Kiwanis International.
That was a real treat, and I can tell that story some other time. The Rose Parade and the Tournament of Roses organization is just, it doesn't come through on television with a lot of the different aspects that happen. First of all, the Tournament of Roses Parade has been around 125 years, 130 years, something like that. And this Rose Parade has been going on that long. And it's primarily a organization that raises hundreds of thousands of dollars of scholarship money through the Tournament of Roses parade and all the revenue they gain from it. It takes 900 volunteers to put on the parade, on parade day. They are all on Honda motorcycles and in white suits. And it's very well organized. As you can imagine, over 130 years, they've got this down to a science. The floats themselves, we got an opportunity to help with the float building. The floats themselves are being designed now. The superstructures of the floats go into production in mid-July, and they're ready for October and November. Early in October, I think it is, they start applying the non-perishable parts of the float, the seeds primarily, and those parts of the float that are not perishable. The hundreds of volunteers help with the production. There are 43 floats in the parade to put in all the fresh flowers on the last week before the parade. Kiwanis is much heavily involved in this than has ever produced, ever advertised on television, but Key Club members and Circle K members from all over California, to the tune of about 800 volunteers, show up at the two major warehouses that build the float. There are two major companies that build all the floats. There's two gigantic warehouses that they're building. The one we were in was in 23. We were right between Mutual of Omaha and the Lions Club. And it's like a beehive of activity for 24 hours a day, putting every rose, every carnation, and every amount of flower on the float. And every square inch of the float has to be covered. On the morning of the parade, we got up at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 4 o'clock in the morning. We had to be at our float location, and the floats are moved out of the warehouses at midnight the night before the parade, and all the super highways and a lot of the roads are shut down by the California Highway Patrol to move the floats into position. The parade is formed on about 4 different side streets in Pasadena, and it's an organized procession, and they blend in float after band, after equestrian unit, after car, and so on. And it's very well organized. So you had to be with your float in position. I think it was at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and the parade moves off exactly at 8 a.m. California time.
Well, it was beautiful, and it was fabulous to see you guys on there, and loved your cowboy hat. While we have just a few more minutes, I wonder if you wouldn't share with this group, who has a very big interest in history, your work with Williamsburg. I think that would be very fascinating to people if you'd be willing to share that.
I've always been interested in history, and I guess it was back in the late 70s, Vicki. We were talking to someone. We had lunch with an official by accident down in Williamsburg, and we became part of one of their donor groups. And we've been involved with Williamsburg since then, the foundation. The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation was organized in the late 20s when Pastor Godwin, the rector of the Episcopal Church, Bruton Parish Church, contacted John D. Rockefeller. They actually met at a Phi Beta Kappa dinner. They were both Phi Beta Kappa, and they sat next to each other. And Reverend Goodwin convinced Rockefeller that this was worth saving. When, for those of you who may not know, the colonial capital of Williamsburg started in the late 1600s when they moved out of Jamestown. They got tired of dealing with the mosquitoes in Jamestown, and it became the colonial capital and remained the colonial capital until 1800. Well, when the capital was moved to Richmond, because of the road system, it sort of sat there. It was still a community, but it didn't experience the growth, the changes that a lot of the communities did. So when Rockefeller gave Goodwin and created a foundation with $35 million, which was a lot of money back in the 30s, they had, I think it was like 60-some original buildings from the 1770s. Now they maintain, I think it's 180, I'm not sure of the numbers, of reconstructed and original buildings in the colonial capital. And their slogan is, that the future may learn from the past. And I never go to Colonial Williamsburg that I don't learn something new. And what's been happening over the last few years, if you haven't been there, is there's a tremendous uptick in the number of costumed interpreters that are very well schooled. They're wonderful actors, and they portray the flavor of Williamsburg as it was in the 1770s. They have expanded their character interpretation to all levels of society. There are women portrayed that own businesses, and women who own their own businesses had almost the same rights as men. There are pastors, there are slaves, there are free African Americans portrayed. Every level of society is portrayed in Williamsburg, and it's just a fascinating place. I never go down that I don't learn something new. The quote I remember from this past weekend, we were down this past weekend, we all saw Patrick Henry give a talk, and he said, "Power is addictive, and power corrupts, and the only way you can maintain your power is to deny the freedoms of your citizens." Thank you very much.
Thank you.